Our next speaker, we know her, we love her. Our friend from the north. Does anybody know Caitlin Long? Caitlin has been around the crypto technology, Bitcoin, blockchain scene for as long as I can remember. I remember when I first met her, we were talking about this idea that she had for a crypto-friendly bank. And if you know anything about recent events, you'd understand why she needs a little time to vent. So she's come down from Wyoming, and I said, you know, we're gonna have a little therapy for you. So she's gonna spend some time telling you how she feels about some stuff. Caitlin, bring it.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, how long are we going? Like 15 minutes? 20, all right. I'll leave time for questions as well. Well, it's an interesting time in our space. I assumed that by now, Custodia, the bank that's headquartered in Cheyenne, would be open, but we've had a little hiccup, like so many have had. And for the longest time, you know, it's so interesting, in the Ethereum community, the focus has been mostly on the SEC in the US with regulatory issues. But my fear all along has been that the bank connectivity of this industry is where the single point of failure is. Ryan Selkis at Masari has been saying that in his annual reports for the last couple of years. And it's unfortunately proving out to be true, that the bank connectivity is among the biggest issues, if not the biggest issue in this sector. A lot of venting tends to go towards Gary Gensler, but I bet you most people don't know who the head of the FDIC is. And he's actually, I think, in many ways, from what I understand, had a much bigger impact on this industry, and he's just not out front. So he's not getting all the shade on social media that Gary Gensler gets. But how are we going to solve this? First of all, let's step back and ask the question, why are we bothering? Because in this industry, especially in the Ethereum community, there are so many other uses beyond money. And the question then becomes, do we care? Weren't we supposed to be replacing the banking system? And the answer is eventually, I think, yes. But we're not ready. We have so much infrastructure build that we still have to do in this industry before we get there. And I think if we went overnight to a transition from the old financial system to the new one, it would be a deflationary depression, and nobody wants that. So I'd much rather see people voluntarily moving with their feet to the new world and coming into this technology with infrastructure and UX designed to be able to bring in even those who are not comfortable with the concept of self-custodying their coins or even using any kind of technology. We need to be able to have infrastructure that brings those folks in too. And we're not there yet. We're not even remotely close to that. So we, therefore, need to be able to keep connectivity to the old traditional financial system, the US dollar system in particular. Now, necessity was the mother of invention because Tether was in some ways created the last time we had debanking. For those of us who've been around in this space for a while, this is my third bear market, and in each of the previous bear markets, there was debanking. In fact, actually, I remember back in 2013, 2014, BitPay and Consensus and Coinbase were about the same size. And Coinbase obviously massively increased its market share relative to BitPay. They went in different directions. BitPay, of course, was focusing mostly just on payments, which was originally what Coinbase was focused on as well. And Coinbase ended up building the exchange, and the rest is history. But the reason I'm bringing up that history in our industry is that Coinbase lost its bank relationship during the debanking wave post-Mt. Gox in 2014. And it was Silicon Valley Bank. This is all publicly disclosed. I don't have direct knowledge of it, but it's worth, again, sharing the history. Silicon Valley Bank pulled back from serving crypto companies and Coinbase was able to pivot quickly, and the rest is history. The ability to maintain the durable banking relationship ultimately chose who the winner was in this space. And that was not what people were thinking, not what folks were set up for back then. Well, guess what? Then it's what we're facing now, I'm afraid. But let's go to the next bear market. So the 2014 bear market was the debanking of Coinbase. The 2018 bear market was the debanking of Tether. And we know what happened when Tether got debanked. It was actually Bitfinex in particular. Tether was created arguably as a reaction to that. And so that's where I'm going. The last time we saw this kind of debanking in the industry, necessity was the mother of invention, and a means by which to get around the US dollar just chokehold on the industry was stablecoins. And of course, the rest is history, and the stablecoin market has obviously taken off. Now, this time, I think, so what's interesting about the debanking wave, Custodia, my company, was at the very front of it, and they shot the proverbial stallion to scatter the herd. But since January 27th, which was our horrible day, there have been actions taken against every stablecoin issuer. And part of the reason I think they might have gone first with us, the Fed wanted to go first before the SEC. We of course, had an application in front of the Fed. But then the SEC went after all the other stablecoin issuers, and here we are. So for now, we're still not sure what the end game is here. There are, of course, for those of you who are watching, Silvergate is unfortunately in a pickle. We don't know how bad it is. And there were rumors that there were bank regulators showing up there this afternoon, but that doesn't appear to be true, thankfully for them. I've said publicly that our industry wouldn't be where we are if it had not been for a couple of banks that had the guts to stand up and say, I want to bank this industry, back in 2014, 2015, of which Silvergate was, of course, one. So we'll see how this all shakes out. It's not over yet, but I think two things will come out of it. I can't wait to see what all of you engineers build, because the next version of Tether, if the US dollar connectivity is really getting choked down, what are the engineers going to build to get around that? There will be a next version of this to deal with the fact that the bank regulators don't seem to want private stablecoins in the US. They're, of course, green-lighted in most of the G7 countries right now. But most of the people have voted with their feet to get US dollar stablecoins. That's what users want. I thought it was interesting, the case study was written up about Venezuela a couple of years ago during the hyperinflation. There were people mining Bitcoin so that they could get USDC and Tether, because the US dollar was what they were really interested in, not Bitcoin. And so that shows you people have voted with their feet in unregulated markets to go for US dollars. Will they keep those US dollars? It remains to be seen. Those of us, maybe the joke was on us for dealing with regulators. I always thought that was the right way to go, because ultimately every US dollar has to settle through the Federal Reserve, even if it's offshore. Tether's right now looking like that was the better route, because those who tried to go in through the front door and ask for permission, of course, were made examples of in the very beginning, in a very heavy-handed way, in the very beginning of this regulatory crackdown. But I still don't think that that's the wrong path. I still think cooler heads are going to prevail. What can I share with you? John wants me to vent. What can I share with you about what I know? I've said publicly that we know that this crypto crackdown is being coordinated. It's not just merely a coincidence. It is absolutely being coordinated, and we actually happen to know that it's being coordinated by the White House. The interesting piece of that And by the way, we have receipts on that, and that was part of what happened with us being at the front of the wave. And so it started White House Fed with us on January 27th, then went SEC to all the exchanges with Wells notices the next week, then the IRS and the SEC went after Kraken the next week, then we had the custody rule issue from the SEC the next week. Now there are apparently a bunch of Wells notices that have gone out to DeFi projects in this week, and of course whatever's happening with Silvergate this week as well. So it's not over yet. It's pretty brutal, and I just described a 6-week period of time. It's a pretty short period of time in the grand scheme of things, but it's an epic in crypto. But that's kind of a downer of a message, and yet you see me with a smile on my face. I have a smile on my face because I don't think that this is the end of it. I know it's not. Just like in the Trump administration, there were warring factions between the pro-crypto folks and the anti-crypto folks. And Trump didn't have a view on this, really. And I think that's probably true of Biden as well. The anti-crypto folks are warring with the pro-crypto folks, and what's been fun for us is how many pro-crypto folks on both sides of the aisle have come forward to tell us what really happened. And it's a sieve in Washington, D.C. It is the scariest. It is as bad as you think it is. It is incredible executive branch overreach. It is agencies throwing caution to the wind, knowing full well that they're not on solid legal ground to do some of the things that they're doing, but doing it anyway, and basically just recognizing, as one person told the story, that this is going to get fought out in the courts, and the agencies are just going to have slowed us all down. And if they lose, then they'll say it's not their fault, it's the judge's fault. So that's how this is the United States of America works in 2023, unfortunately. But the optimistic angle here is, of course, the judicial branch is an equal branch of government, so keep an eye on their lawsuits. There are 3 lawsuits already in flight from this industry against the different agencies. You've got 2 against the SEC, both Grayscale and Ripple, and then you've got us against the Fed, Custodia, and there are more lawsuits coming. And so that's one angle. The other angle, though, is that from what we know that happened in the White House, and we know the names. By the way, I find it hilarious. I'd never heard of the people involved. I don't know how they even knew who we were, but suddenly we were being attacked by the White House. It was all done very, very underhandedly with the press. Actually, I'll even share, because this is public, the Fed and the bank regulators asked all of us that had applications in front of them to withdraw the applications, or the staff would recommend the applications be denied. Typically, you get a week to make that decision. In our case, they gave us 48 hours. And so we had to call an emergency board meeting, et cetera. This is, 48 hours is not a lot of time, so this was clearly done to put pressure on us. Then the phone started ringing because the press had been tipped off by the Fed that our application was going to be voted down. And that happened even before our board meeting. So it was very underhanded. And then we actually we sent in a letter after the board meeting, and within hours a reporter called us and was reading from our letter. So it was pretty nasty, folks. But all that said, now that I know the names of the people who did all this, I find it all amusing, because I know that they had a power vacuum that they could walk into and fill. And now that jobs have been filled above them, they're not in control anymore. So this is the optimistic conclusion that I draw. This is not over. This is far from over. And the resurgency of the more reasonable folks in the power structure of the Biden administration has happened. The question is, at what point will they start pushing back on the agency overreach that has taken place? It sucks. It's a bummer that we had to deal with this, because there are a lot of, I asked the question rhetorically, is this the United States of America? Are we still a country of rule of law? Do we still have due process for companies and businesses and even DAOs that set up legitimate projects in this industry? and are being pursued by regulators that may not have jurisdiction. I've heard all kinds of things about regulators doing things outside of their statutory jurisdiction. And again, they're just daring us all to sue them. And okay, if that's what they want, here we go. But I'm not concluding that it all has to get fought out in the courts, because I am optimistic that cooler heads are going to prevail. It is crazy to push this entire industry offshore. There was a very interesting analysis of software developers in this space, just how many have left the United States in the last few years due to the fact that you have clearer regulation and more welcoming jurisdictions for the software developers to do business, and that just breaks my heart. We've done so much in Wyoming to try to bring developers in, some very interesting laws, including one that just passed this year that prohibits the compelled disclosure of private keys. So if there's a divorce or something, a judge can force you to move your digital assets, but the judge cannot force you to cannot compel you to reveal your private key. That's designed to protect folks in this industry from an attack by the legal system. We always knew an attack by the legal system was an attack vector on us. And another one is a law that passed 2 years ago in Wyoming that protects software developers. Code is speech. And as long as a developer writes code, if someone uses it to commit a crime, then that's the crime. But just merely the act of writing code is not criminal. There's a push to criminalize the act of writing code in the United States, coming out of Washington, D.C., to try to make some of this stuff illegal. But Wyoming as a state is leading the way, pushing back against that to try to protect all of you so that you don't face criminal liability for the mere fact of writing code. Let me stop. We have 3 minutes left. Let me see if anybody in the audience has questions. It's a cool vibe late on a Friday night. Anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
So you mentioned the executive, you mentioned the judicial, you mentioned the states. What about Congress?
Okay, good question. I mentioned executive branch, judicial branch, the states. What about Congress? That is interesting, because in everything that's happened, we have had people from Congress reach out to us. They're watching what's going on, because we unfortunately were thrust into the spotlight as the tip of the spear. And they know that something untoward happened to us, and they want to know about it. So the problem is that Congress right now is pretty much impotent. We've got a divided Congress. We've got one house in Republican control, one house in Democratic control, and the presidency in Democratic control. Interestingly, when all three of those were under Democratic control, Congress couldn't agree to get a stablecoin bill passed anyway. So I think the chances of something happening that's meaningful are pretty slim. And so I don't have a lot of optimism. I like the fact that we're seeing real examples set by the work, for example, that Senator Gillibrand, a Democrat from New York, and Senator Cynthia Lomas, a Republican from Wyoming, strange bedfellows, but they are working together. I've been in the same room with those two women one time, and they are so fun to watch because they're genuinely friends, and they're actually working together. And so the question is, can they actually drag along the powers that be in their respective, they're both in the Senate. Gillibrand, of course, comes from New York. Schumer, majority leader, is from New York. So if New York decides they want to get behind something, then there's a good chance it happens in the Senate. But the House is in Republican control. So most of what I'm hearing in D.C., and I like to stay out of D.C., but most of what I'm hearing is that there's not much chance of anything happening. It's just little things around the edges. So we're going to have to basically tough it out, at least until the next election, and then maybe even longer. So, all right. Well, I'll give you 30 seconds back. I'll be here, I'll be around tomorrow morning as well if you want to chat about what's going on in Wyoming, and stay tuned because I'm hoping that we'll have some good news. What's happening with Custodia it's far from over for us yet. We are this close to launching the bank. We just don't have the final piece in place yet, but we're this close and hopefully can turn it on very quickly and try to fill the void for this industry. It's going to be tough to get bank accounts. I'll warn everybody in advance. The regulatory crackdown on the banks is pretty extreme. And so just everybody needs to be patient with your bank. If you have a bank account right now, do everything you can to keep it. And if your bank is asking you for compliance information, don't fight back because the banks are under incredible regulatory pressure. And those that stand up and fight for this industry are worth keeping. Thanks all.
Here, here. Thank you, Caitlin.